Hi, everybody. If you don't know who I am, I'm Mia Chertish. I'm the Executive Director of the Montauk Historical Society. And I'm really glad that you all came here tonight to find out what really happened in Prohibition. When we put this exhibition together, we worked on it for many months and we did a lot of research. And we thought we had all the answers, but these people will tell you what really happened. I'm really thrilled to have this fabulous panel. Moderated by our beloved Hugh King, historian. And here we have Marshall Prado, Cheryl Eckerblocker, the notorious James Grimes, and Patty Fales. We also have a guest who's going to appear on, who unfortunately couldn't be here today because he had to be somewhere else, but he has a little recording that we will share in a little while. So enjoy and thanks again for coming.
Okay, if any of you attended the lectures that we've had previous on Prohibition, we heard that there was a bar in New York City called Chumley's, and it was on 86th Street. So when the feds come in the front door, everybody yelled 86 it, and they went out the back door. Okay? So if we get raided tonight, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to ring the bell, and you're all going to say 86 it. All right, let's practice. 86 it. Okay, now here's how we leave, okay, if we get raided. Marshall Fuel delivers fuel oil to me and Amagansett, so Marshall goes out first, and the rest of you are on your own. Okay, we have one more thing I have to clear up. Just in case Jim Grimes swears tonight, just in case that happens, I was told to ring the bell, and then Dick White will contribute $100 to the Montauk Historical Society.
That's fucking great.
There you go. There's one.
Okay, enough about me. Okay, I'd like to go around and ask each of our panelists. Patty, where did you learn, or who told you some of the stories that you're going to tell us tonight?
Family, parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles. My mother's from Montauk. My mother was born in Montauk. She's Cheryl's mom's sister and Marshall's mom's cousin and somehow related to Jim.
Okay, here's how it works.
Jimmy.
Your grandmother and my grandmother were first cousins.
Okay, there you go.
So we're third cousins.
Okay. We're third. Jim's my third cousin. And we just grew up hearing stories.
And you're going to tell us next, not yet. Jim, where did you hear some of the stories you're going to tell
I think
us?
Patty hit on it. Our families all came from the same island up in Nova Scotia. Somewhere it started around 1904, continued through up till the 30s. Okay, cod fishery died up in Nova Scotia. The wooden boat industry died up in Nova Scotia. People were desperate to make a living. So some of them went to Boston, some of them went to Gloucester. A lot of them stayed in the fishing industry. But the families dated back to the 1600s in what is now Canada. Okay. And the idea of smuggling and such they were no strangers to that. But in any case, how did I learn my stuff? I learned it when I was real little. My great-grandmother would share little pieces. My grandmother embarrassingly would tell me little pieces when my grandfather had a couple too many. And then I learned most of it, the chronology and stuff, from my grandfather when he was dying. We had these times where we sat and spoke, and he kind of gave me the beginning through the end of Prohibition and his life coming down here. But that's how.
Okay, thank you. Cheryl?
Yeah, that's basically what Jimmy and Patty said. I heard many stories from my maternal grandparents, Patty's grandparents. My mom had stories.
Everyone had stories.
Everyone had stories. And then I had bootlegging on both sides. My family owned Trails End Restaurant down in the village for 59 years, and it was during the bootlegging days. And so I had an aunt that was she would call herself a bachelor girl, not quite an old maid, and we're all named after her. That was Anna Fallon, and she was.
I think you should tell the story of how she came
Can I tell
to
her? quick?
town.
Okay.
Yeah, but look out at the.
Oh, sorry.
Try not to
Okay.
look at me, I'm sorry.
Okay, a very very quick story, if you don't mind.
No, that's why we're here.
So my grandmother, and my grandmother and her two sisters, Anna Fallon and Mary Fallon, were orphaned very young in Pennsylvania, in the coal mining region. And their father had died in one of the mines, and their mom died a year or two later from the flu, the 1911 flu, or something, whatever was going on, and they all farmed out to first cousins. And my grandmother, Catherine Fallon, lucked out. She just lucked out. She got into this great big, really big Irish family. We're Irish, so big Irish family raised, they adopted her, but they never told her that until after she passed. Then we knew she was adopted. But they never made her change her name from Fallon to Pugh. My other aunt went with another relative, and my Aunt Ann Fallon went with a maiden aunt in Pennsylvania who was ornery. I mean, just ornery like. So she took off. She ran away very early teens. And she went into Manhattan, and she got the domestics. She became a domestic in a nanny situation for a wealthy family in Manhattan. And they had a summer house in Southampton. So they would bring Anne out, and on one of her nights off, she ended up in Montauk, and she won Trails End Restaurant in a card game. The guy was putting his restaurant, she won it. And as it turned out, she borrowed money from my grandfather, John Ecker, just to close the deal and stuff like that. And then my father and his family came out every summer to work it, which is also part of our tradition, which is another show. How about that? Because there's lots of rites of passages when your family owns a restaurant. But anyway, so we got the stories that way, just through the years.
Okay. Marshall, where did you first learn about it?
Well, I learned most of my stuff from my father, who was Carl Fisher's chauffeur and wound up out here in the early days, and married one of those, what he called Canuck girls from
No, we
Canada.
were not Canucks. We were never
And
Canucks.
he was a man about town, and I would get most of my information from him and his buddies just by listening to them and hanging around with them. As a little kid, the fathers would always grab the oldest one and take him to work with them. So we've been working since we were 4 months. And we're still there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, my father took me with him for plumbing, and that cured me of plumbing.
That's right.
Right. Okay, now let's hear, Patty, would you tell us one story that you remember the most, or your favorite story, or one? Then Jimmy will tell us one. Then Cheryl, and then Marshall, and then we'll go to the videotape and hear from Tim Gilmartin. Okay?
That's great. Perfect.
Okay, Patty, you're on.
Okay.
Somebody else
the one-
drinking.
Throw the cap away, Jimmy. Boom.
The one story that, and it's interesting
You
because
need a glass.
I don't need advice. Neat. Thank you. Cheers.
This is iced tea, everybody. Iced tea.
I'll drink to that.
The one story that it's interesting because some of the relatives are like, I never heard that story. So I'm not sure whether it came from a reliable grandparent source or, just something that we heard, which every story we have is one, we didn't live through. But that the story goes, and we'll have to check the chronology of that, is that my grandparents, our grandparents, were probably the most straight-laced, mass every day, But during Prohibition, you did what you had to do to make money, to provide for your family. This would have been before they actually had a family. The story goes that my grandmother left her wedding reception because she had to go count money for one of the rum runners.
Well, and who was her uncle?
Who was, yeah. And so that was that was one we really like. We're like, go yeah, you know? There was nothing wrong with that.
Okay, Jim?
I don't know. There's a whole chronology here. My grandfather Edgar came down here to work for the Edwards boys, along with a lot of the French Acadians. Back in, I think, 1916, he came down here. He lasted about 2 years. Didn't like the bunker fishing. I don't think anybody did. It was dirty. He went back up to Canada. And lo and behold, 1920 came. The Volstead Acts kicked in. And you got to put it in context here. On the 14th of January, drinking's legal. On the 16th of January, it's now a crime. Okay, it's not a crime in Canada. It's not a crime anywhere in Europe. So I think initially it wasn't taken all that serious. Well, my grandfather told me he didn't get along with his dad too good, who was a blacksmith. So they had all of these cod schooners sitting in Arichat Harbor that were partially derelict. The rigging was shot on a lot of them. And what him and a couple friends did is they started cobbing together gear and rigging. These were sailors. They may have had a little pony engine in them, but not much. They started cobbing gear together. They ran them up to St. John's, Newfoundland, loaded them up with as much liquor as they could carry. They ran it down here. Clearly, they were funded by somebody. He told me the deal they had was if you got stopped or boarded, don't carry any guns, don't put up any fight. They're going to bring you either into New London, Boston, New York. They'll bring you into 3 or 4 harbors. When they do, he was the money guy because he was running the boat. He said you could put almost $30,000 in a money belt. And his job was, if they were coming into port, a guy in a green straw hat, I may have the color wrong, will approach the boat. Don't worry, the police and the Coast Guard won't stop him. As long as he could hand that money belt off, everything was cool. And they did that for a few years until the Coast Guard got better at interdiction, and they were running out of these pieces of shit boats to run. Dick, it's 200. So what do you call it? They shifted. He went from there, he was running a scallop dredge out of New Jersey. The scallop dredge was registered with enormous fuel tanks. In truth, it had almost no fuel capacity at all. And the reason being, the Coast Guard would board you, they would take an old hand crank drill and they'd probe around. They'd hit metal, they'd say, okay, this boat's all fuel tanks. And what they would do is they would go offshore, they would meet a ship, they would load it up with liquor, they would run it back in. You couldn't do that because people would notice. How the hell do you go up scalloping and come back with no scallops? and
Suitcases of
and
money.
then go back, and then go out a couple days later. So what they did, they broke down a few times. They finally got to the point they were buying scallops while they were out there. Then they bought scallops and poured fuel all over the scallops and blamed the Coast Guard for drilling through the fuel tank, which wrecked the scallops. That finally fell apart. So then he graduated up to what we would call the cigarette boats, okay, which were big engines, open deck, and just running, they could outrun the Coast Guard. And that's where that's what almost killed him, because he was coming into a dock in New Jersey, and they didn't have radios. There were radios, but they didn't have radios. The deal that they had is you'd wait for some stupid signal light blinking twice or something, and that meant it was cool. So he doesn't get the signal. So he says to the guy that's on the boat with him, listen, and you got to realize, these boats they weren't easy to get in and out of gear. So you didn't take a boat out of gear if you wanted to take off in the boat, because you might not be able to get it back into gear quick. So he said, listen, I'm going to coast up to the T. You hop out on the dock, walk the length of the T. If it's cool, I'll circle around. And if it's not cool, just jump back in the boat and we're going to take off. So he said everything was all right. It was dead quiet. He pulls up to the dock. His guy's getting off the boat. He just wants to make sure he can see him, that he's getting onto the dock all right. He said he opened the wheelhouse door, and they just opened up on him. Okay, so he took 2 bullets in the chest. His buddy jumped back on the boat. He ran the boat into the Hackensack swamps. And the nice people that he worked for, which he said he never worked for organized crime or the mob. I just want to make that perfectly fucking clear. Okay.
You missed that one.
They hooked him up with a veterinarian and got him patched up and sent him home. But he pretty much never gave it up throughout all of Prohibition. You know, a lot of these guys, it was quick money, it was easy money. And truthfully, a lot of people didn't look at it as you were doing anything wrong. And, you know, the whole roaring 20s, the flappers and all that stuff, the people, the families out here, they weren't part of that, okay? These people lived from week to week. They didn't have much in the way of money. There was no town of Montauk at that time. There was the fishing village, and the fishing village was owned by Long Island Railroad. You had a month-to-month lease. You didn't even have like a year lease. You had a month-to-month lease that the railroad had the right to terminate, give you 30 days notice, which they did do. The fishing village collapsed not from the 38 hurricane, but when the Navy bought the property, which is now Rough Riders, they gave everybody 30 days to leave. But my great-grandmother used to tell me about the train coming in, and everybody was doing it. So there was a détente. You didn't have to worry about some nosy neighbor ratting you out, because they were as up to their eyeballs in it as you were. I mean, you know, my grandmother dated Jimmy Martell. My grandfather told me this story, and I don't know, you all know probably Young Jim. Well, his dad looked a little like Young Jim. But old Jim, my grandfather told me, was fancied himself as sort of an Errol Flynn type character. Okay. And he liked to dress up. And he had like the bandoliers and the 2 pistols and the whole 9 yards. And I was very fortunate that my grandfather was able to win my grandmother away from Jimmy Martell. Because God only knows, but I digress. So what used to happen is you had all of these fishermen, which, keep in mind, in 1918, the biggest boat was 22 feet. Fishing out of the piers in Montauk. That was a dragger. Okay, so these people would go out fishing, they would trap fishing, whatever. When the train was coming, everybody had their liquor stacked in these little yards, because you only had these little postage stamp lots, which were literally half the size of this room. So everybody had a square clothesline set up. So what you did, and the liquor was always stacked in the middle. So what you did is you went and ripped the rugs up, the friggin' sheets off the beds, and you hung all of this shit around. $300, Dick.
Ching, ching.
You hung all of this stuff up so that the people going by on the train couldn't see all of this liquor. And then they got very creative. They started growing potatoes in Montauk. Montauk didn't have good soils for potatoes or growing much of anything. But the problem they had is it was very difficult to explain a truck full of potatoes, or more importantly, a truck full of whiskey, driving across Napeague Stretch. So the potatoes were only grown for the purpose of covering what was underneath them. So you didn't need all that many, and I think I'm taking up too much time.
No. This
All right,
is
thank you, Vinny. Thank you. Vinny. I'm calling you Vinny. Okay, Cheryl, your turn.
Okay, our grandfather was, down where the yacht club is, Montauk Yacht Club and everything like that, the stone walls and stuff like that. They used to be stationed inside there, I guess, and from what we heard.
They were
And-
guardhouses.
Guardhouses, thank you for the lack of my words here. My grandfather would have been in one of those, and if the feds were coming through, they called the Lake Club, boom. And so this is actually a story. They would call and let them know, and then they would go into 86 mode, right? Everyone would boom. But Phil Hewitt, his dad would have been George Hewitt, Jimmy Hewitt from the Shagwan. Phil relayed the story. If you don't mind me reading it, is that okay?
Love it.
Okay. The famous political figure, as we spoke about, Mayor Jimmy Walker. His dad, George Hewitt, had just dropped off some booze when the alarms went off. That was from the gatehouse. He hadn't gotten paid for the stuff, so he and I guess maybe Mayor Jimmy Walker, they grabbed aprons, they emptied some garbage, got themselves all dirty, they put the booze back in a big garbage can, and they were just, when the feds came through, they were just walking out with the garbage cans. They put them in a robot and got the hell out of there. That's the story.
That's one story, and you're sticking to it.
I'm sticking to it.
What year was this in?
Let me add on to that.
Okay.
When they took him outside,
It was
I
from Phil.
have a picture. My father at that point was in the
I'm going to hold it to camera.
the cab business, and he always had to hide a cab somewhere near the entrance so they could get Jimmy Walker out, have him sit in the car until it was free to get him out of there, and it would wish him down to town and then down by the railroad.
Yeah,
And this is Cheryl's grandfather, Eddie Ecker?
that's my father.
Yes,
That's my father. Yeah.
that's her dad.
Yeah, he was one of the taxi drivers.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So some of the stories I have is when my father he was also in the early days in the oil business, and he would grab, usually me, I was the oldest, and would help him pull a hose. And there were certain houses we would go to, and I'd be pulling the hose. He goes, no, not that tank. Tank's got a fill here. No, not that tank. Well, why? Just no and shut up. Go over here. That tank had better than fuel oil, had
Yeah.
whiskey in it. Most of them are up near where Jimmy lives now. The Upper Shepherd's Neck, a little lower than the school. And there was tanks like that all over Montauk, around the golf course. So that was.
There was the house that when it was built was, who bought it? Lydia and Evie.
Right, that house had-
Saturday? And that had a basement downstairs with a whole big.
Well, that was the speakeasy. That was the speakeasy for the neighborhood.
What house is that?
Next to Big Tuttle's house.
Oh,
Normie
Big-
Tuttle's.
yeah,
Tuttle's,
yeah.
Normie Tuttle's.
Speakeasy and brothel.
I'm sorry, what's that?
Speakeasy and brothel.
What?
Those were our cousins you're talking about. And I take exception
We
to
never
that.
heard that
What's
story.
your point? What's your point?
Please read your story.
They had a yard sale with the stuff from the basement. Yeah. And among the things were these 1920s condoms,
Oh,
which you can see in our display.
I think I must have missed that one.
And yeah, and so they were
Do they say Goodyear or something on the side of them?
good time.
Good time.
But anyway, so they're in that, and that was, and when it was Diane Sheridan who did all the design for this, and always buys packaging of whatever kind. She found these old condoms.
Wow.
These are amazing. And they told her the story. This came from the days when it was a.
Okay.
These are all relatives of you, Jim? All right, go ahead. You got more? You're done. All right, could we now turn to Tim Gilmartin?
That would be great.
Right?
I'll start with Joe Miller, though. He was a longtime family friend, lived on the old Montauk Highway, just east of Surf and Sand Bar there. I'm not sure what he did for a living. Could have been a fisherman. He could have had a service station. But this story about him is from my father, so it is secondhand, not firsthand. So if he had a service station, he could build false bottoms in trucks big enough to hold cases of whiskey. My father said Joe was driving a truck into the city with a load of whiskey, and he came upon a state trooper roadblock. And of course, they were looking for whiskey. His truck came up to number 1, and they looked at his license plate, and it says, "Go right ahead, sir, you're clear." So the state patrol somebody was paying them off, and he went through with no problems. That's my only story about Joe Miller. Gene Beckwith Sr., I think he was a fisherman when I was tending bar at the Blue Marlin in 1970. He would come in maybe once a month and have a couple of beers. I would assume he was born right around 1900. So he would be 70 years old back then. And he got to talking with me about Prohibition, and he was out in his boat, took a load of whiskey onto his boat, and all the whiskey was in burlap bags. He got stopped by the Coast Guard. They came aboard and they said, "What's in the burlap bags?" He said, "Potatoes." So one of the Coast Guard men took a hammer to the bag and, of course, broke a bottle, and all the whiskey was on the deck. So they arrested him and took him to New London. That's where the Coast Guard headquarters was at that time. And threw him in jail overnight. He said at about 8 o'clock in the morning, the door opens and they said, "Come on out, you're free." And Gene says, "What do you mean?" He said, the Coast Guard guy says, "Somebody paid your bail. You're free to go." So he never found out who paid the bail. I don't know how he got back to Montauk and what happened to his boat. Another story he told me, he was newly married, about in his early 20s, and he had just bought a house. And I'm not sure where he lived, but he said with the money he made from hauling whiskey, he paid off the house in 3 payments. I do have one more story from my father and my mother. They were at Christmas Eve Mass back in the day, and my father said he was about the only man in church. And all of a sudden they heard this gunfire coming from the Fort Pond Bay area. And it sounded like machine guns, and it was some kind of raid by the Coast Guard. That's the only details I have about that, but I don't have any more details about that. But it is a well-known fact that there was machine gun fire at Fort Pond area during Christmas Eve.
Patty,
Yes, sir.
would you like to say something else?
I think Jim covered it. And actually, to back up, all the stories I got truly were probably from Jim Grimes.
How much of that have you had already?
I'm not pulling rank or
Okay,
know-
wait,
you
I
know
do
more.
want to mention, go ahead. You wanna say
I think
something?
it's important, and Jimmy touched on it, and Patty and Marshall, important for people to know that our families didn't make money off of this, like, just for frivolous. Like you said, we weren't part of the flappers.
Right.
They were just truly trying to make ends meet. Their homes that were all built down in the old village, they were made from fish boxes. When the train started coming through, what year, whatever that was, the train, the guys on the train, they understood how poor that area was.
Yeah.
They would throw, they would throw coal out, and the families would go and collect the coal and warm their houses. Mm-hmm. And like Jimmy says, you had two. This room here would be the equivalent of two houses. One would be very close to the water. The next one would be. They were on the sand. They were not in the dunes, and that's what the kids did. They brought the coal back, and you couldn't afford kerosene, and
Marshall's wasn't open.
And Marshall
We
wasn't
had some,
open.
yeah.
Marshall wasn't open. But that's. I just want to be clear about that. There was no one made $1 million off of this. It was just.
Well, to piggyback off what you said, the average salary we found out in East Hampton in 1920 was $15 a week. So one night, unloading or stacking, get $5 a case, you get 20 case, you could make 3 weeks' salary in one night.
Right.
So, and as Cheryl said, nobody's getting rich.
Yeah, it was that was never the intent either. But I do have one more story. This is from a gentleman named Gus Pitts, and he was from Nova Scotia as well. His story might have his own embellishments in it, but
That's okay.
he had he'll tell you about an 85-foot boat, and then we really know that probably was not happening. But the one interesting thing that he did say is that when he would go out with himself and somebody else, like they would go out miles out to the mothership, for the lack of a better term, he would have $0.50, and then the captain of that boat would have the other half, and that's how they knew it was a legitimate deal.
Yeah.
I just thought that was kind of an interesting, little piece you don't think about.
Yeah.
Marshall, go ahead.
There was one more story that we heard. It's never been really officially,
Substantiated.
yeah.
Oh, tell it
But there was
anyway.
apparently
A state trooper walked into Rushmeyer's restaurant one night, and everybody was in there drinking and partying, and he suddenly came to his death. Boom. Shot in, that's what we heard. Shot right in the restaurant, fell to the floor, they dragged him out, and no one ever said a word about it, because no one heard anything.
We got married there.
Huh?
We got married.
I know, I was there.
That's what my reception was too.
So whether or not that story is true, but I've heard it 3 or 4 times
Yeah.
from different people. You heard that same story?
Yeah.
But they interviewed, everyone was there and no one heard a shot, no one saw the
Right.
nothing. Not one person came up with anything. So the case was dropped and,
What was the state trooper's body found?
pardon me?
Was the state trooper's body found?
Yes, out in the back. I don't know how he got there.
Something happened.
He was depressed.
Well, one of the most famous events happening down there in Montauk was Third House. And Vinny, you had a perspective that you wanted to say about Third House. Vinny, I keep calling him Vinny. Jimmy.
Jimmy, what?
The deal there was we're here. None of us were born during Prohibition. All the shit we heard from grandma this or whatever, or, somebody got half a load on, and, it's like the Gus Pitt story. Gus is my uncle, and Gus is a terrific guy. But Gus, I think, lived kind of vicariously through other people's experiences. The 80-foot open boat that a 14-year-old kid is running. Think about this for just a minute. If you were the owner of that 85-foot boat, which the boat they're referring to was the Black Duck. There was 2 boats that are kind of... The Black Duck has some notoriety because it was machine gunned by the Coast Guard for allegedly firing back at the Coast Guard. One small problem with that, the Black Duck was owned by the same people that owned the Grey Gander. And the Grey Gander, my grandfather ran. And he said they had strict rules. Don't have any guns on the boat. Don't worry about it. If you get arrested, everything will be fine. My grandfather went to his grave hating the U.S. Coast Guard because he claimed the only reason they machine gunned the Black Duck was because they couldn't catch it. And I don't believe either of those boats were 85 foot. I think they were more like 40 feet. But anyway, the one that I had heard was related to Third House and a little dust up there where somebody either got shot. Yeah, they got shot. But at that point, it was investigated. Things had gone too far. The DA ultimately felt that they had the goods on basically everybody in town. And quietly, and it was towards the end of Prohibition, the game was almost over anyway, everybody was kind of given the choice, either like cease and desist or we're going to pursue this, which I think may have coincided with the Catholic Church being built. There's a kind of guilt going on there.
Right.
But it kind of stopped. Now, allegedly, the Dickinson family were able to secure the superintendent's position for the state park and pass it down to their sons. But you know what? There's absolutely nothing that I've ever seen that was evidence to that. That was rumor, and that's all that was. You know, and I think, you know, like I said earlier, this community wasn't rich. The families that came here at the turn of the century, Jeanette Rattray wrote that history in the 30s. In fact, it was written before the 38 hurricane about the history of Montauk. You ever read it? It's not a very big thing. Where in the book she mentions that immigration issues have gotten so bad that some of these Frenchies from Canada have come down and they have the gall. They're actually living at the coal bin at the lighthouse. Well, that was my great-grandfather and his brother that were living at the coal bin at the lighthouse. They weren't living there because they were looking for a free place to live, man. These people had nothing. They lived in the coal bin during the summer. They trap fished off the beach for the season. When the Coast Guard got their coal delivery, which coincided around October 1, they would pitch tents on the beach for the last few weeks of the season. They would take trains back up to Nova Scotia. Ultimately, they moved their families down to Nohant, Connecticut, spent a couple years there, and then ultimately moved the families to the fishing village. Times were never great. I mean, you had these momentary windfalls. World War I, the dirigible facility, which is downtown Montauk, brought some quick cash to town. Okay, people had a little bit of money. And then Prohibition started just about the time that Carl Fisher showed up in town. And that was a windfall for the people that lived here, man. They really looked at this as our only ability to kind of make it. And like I said earlier, these people were used to, you know, my family has a history of, I had a couple family members that were hung as pirates and stuff. And they had a history of shuttling goods between Nova Scotia, Boston, New York, and that because they had been avoiding taxes and tariffs that way going back through colonial times. So none of this stuff were they strangers to this sort of lifestyle. And hey, I'm glad they came here. I'm glad they were able to do what they did. My grandparents, when they moved the family, Dan, I had an uncle, Vincent. Well, Vincent fell overboard in November, tending a fish trap in Fort Pond Bay. Cheryl hit on it earlier. You know, you were heating these little shacks with kerosene or scavenged coal and stuff like that. Well, they couldn't get the house warm enough. Vincent got a cold, which turned into pneumonia, which turned into Vincent getting buried up at Cedar Lawn 2 weeks later. And that was not an unusual occurrence there, man. That was just a fact of life in those days. We had no real doctors out here. There was no readily access to you know, health care or any of that. So you just kind of, you roughed it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we all lost many members of our family for the smallest things that turned into death. There was just no one to take care of you. I mean, that's why they came up with, remember Elizabeth Job, she had a whole book full of things. You could eat worms for this and
Howl at the moon.
drink
she had
kerosene
everything
for this.
done. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so she was
absolutely.
the closest thing we had to a doctor. We had to,
You're right. You're right, Mark.
we had to stay the hell away from her because it tasted bad.
She was Elizabeth Joyce, actually. She was
Yes.
Sam Joyce Sr.'s daughter.
Related to Peggy Joyce?
Sister-in-law.
Yes.
Peggy Joyce could get you well in about 5 minutes.
Give you a little scruff of that 5 o'clock shadow, man, and freaking wake you right up.
Anybody in the audience have a question? And please don't make the question longer than the answer. Okay, you have a question?
You know, it's fascinating to hear about one of the things that's been highlighted here is that these were regular people, hardworking people, people without a lot of money doing what they needed to do. But when you think about Prohibition and these exercises of running the liquor, making the coordinations and the boats and stuff, clearly there were people pulling the strings, and it was not your families or your friends and relatives.
We were the strings.
It was, and so I wonder, does anybody have any insights into what was the machine that was keeping this going?
I think we all asked that question at some points in our lives. And you know what? I know I didn't. I was never told who owned the boats, who they were actually working for.
Right.
All I was told was, no. It was, the liquor got paid for, and they, this whole thing evolved. They started running liquor and load in Newfoundland and stuff. And, as Prohibition progressed, it wasn't a static situation. The first rum running was where you literally ran the ship that you were carrying the liquor in. You ran it right into the beach and unloaded it, took that cod schooner, ran it off the beach, scuttled it, rowed back to shore, and took the train back to Nova Scotia. It was that. And I asked my grandfather, Grandpa, why didn't you sail the boat back to Nova Scotia? He says, what it's like to beat back to Nova Scotia? He goes, it'd take us friggin' 2 months to get home. And he goes, we were amazed that we made it down there in the boat that we had. So as time went on, well, then the Coast Guard started to interdict those boats. So they started to go off 3 miles. Okay, you can see a boat 3 miles off. And then when it got too hot to do that, well, then it turned into that Rum Runners Row where you were 12 miles off the beach, which, by the way, for the families that were here, going 12 miles offshore in those days with no electronics, no nothing, it was tantamount to going halfway to Europe. Okay, these were you were taking your friggin' life in your hands to go out there, and consequently, the methodology that you were using changed. But it seemed like on my grandfather's end, he was always working for the same people, and they were all very nice. Never mentioned any ethnic issues or anything there. Were they Italian or were they this or that? No, it was just some nice people, and they made sure.
Don't you think maybe they didn't want to know?
Well, I think there was a fair part of that. I think it was one of those things. You didn't ask questions that you didn't want the answers to. And, if you look at the history, the Catholic Church in Montauk, it was fine. The Catholic Church was built in 1928. Okay, same year my dad was born. And the history behind, I'm totally off the friggin' subject here.
No.
Is it okay? Does anybody care?
It's still only $300.
Okay, so what do you call it? The way the Catholic Church came to be is at the anniversary of the Spanish-American War, when Teddy Roosevelt had his little Rough Rider gig, they brought the North Atlantic Fleet into Fort Pond Bay as a commemoration. I do not remember the year. They said Mass on the deck of a cruiser out there. The Monsignor that said Mass was Monsignor Chidwick. He was the chaplain on the Maine, which, if you remember the Spanish-American War, remember the Maine. He was the chaplain on that boat. Well, he was also friendly with this guy, Walter McCaffrey, who was a stock guy who had what became Rhinestein's, the Windmill House, whatever, in Ditch Plains. Well, he was visiting. He was saying Mass out on the deck of his cruiser. There was like 60 French-Acadian families that attended Mass. He gets to talking to these people and says, hey, there's a lot of you guys here. How come you don't have a church? Well, that was kind of way beyond. Like, they couldn't even think to that point. He said, hey, here's the deal. If you guys can raise the money to build a church, Carl Fisher donated the property for the Catholic Church as well as the Presbyterian Church. We didn't have enough Jews for a synagogue. There were no Muslims here then. But he said, listen, if you can raise enough money to build a church, I'll see that the Diocese of Brooklyn get you a priest and stuff. Well, they raised the money for that church in like record time. Now, a lot of that money came from wealthy donors, but I think a lot of it was guilt money from, the guy, people like, okay, you did make some money. You felt a little bit self-conscious about it. And what do? It's like when you go to a restaurant and you have a pocket full of cash, you tip well. And I think that was sort of
No, they were looking for forgiveness. Yeah.
Anybody else?
Question. Any of you ever hear about Murder Hill? The story that I heard a few years ago.
Murder Valley.
Murray Valley.
No, not Murder Valley. Murder Hill.
over.
Not Massacre Valley. It's
No,
Murder
it's
Hill.
Murder Hill's over by the Montauk.
The Montauk.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
Murder
So
Valley.
what's the story?
I don't know. Tell us.
I do know.
What's the story?
All I know is there's a place called
Clearly
Murder
you
Hill
know something.
near the Montauk.
Come on,
Yes.
Nate, get over here by the microphone.
No. There's a place called Murder Hill. It was named that way because a state trooper or some other
I gotta
fed
tell you.
was killed there.
Okay,
thrown over.
let's check the body count that we're at to right now. Okay, we got one dead at Rushmeyer's
One
in
in
the
Murray
back.
Valley.
Got another one dead at Third House,
Two people-
and now, okay, and now we got somebody dead by the Montauk. It's getting. I got to tell you, the body.
My
count's
mother talked
friggin-
about that one. Yeah.
Which one, the Murder Valley?
Murder Valley.
They always called it
Murder Hill.
Well, we always called it Murder Valley.
Well, no, Massacre Valley is over off of Edgemere.
Well, that wasn't a policeman. That was, I think, a brawl over a.
May have had something to do with those condoms that you found.
I think it was just a couple of drunken people, and one of them got killed.
Okay.
There you go.
My mother made it sound like that.
During Prohibition was the story that I.
That may be cool.
I thought it was after.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, but I'm not sure. But she mentioned Murder Valley often, and I wasn't sure if it was the Valley. Murder Hill, whatever. If you're on the top or the bottom. I'm not sure if it was not the houses the area right past the Montauk or the one down Dog Shit Alley.
No, it's on the left. The area I'm thinking is on the left.
Where Babe
Babe
lived, yeah, down that valley.
Excuse me. Dog Shit Alley? Yeah. Now, where did that come from?
That's an official name.
Oh, I know. What's the legit?
It's around the corner from Murder Hill.
Okay, we'll leave that one alone. All right. We have enough. Yes?
Well, wasn't there an incident on Christmas Eve where all the women were in church?
Yes.
And there was some scuffle.
That's what Timmy was talking about.
But the deal on Christmas Eve in church in Montauk, if you ever did it back then,
I know you're going to talk.
There was typically several incidents at any given midnight mass. There was, I remember going to mass when I was about 4 years old, and one of the local guys in town sort of fell out of the pew into the aisle. And, in those days, they had the neat little fence around the altar, like we were going to make a run for it. And the priest come out, and he opened his little gate, and he walked around, he went over, kicked the guy a few times. The guy got up, he climbed back into the pew, and Mass continued. And then after Mass, what you did is you went around, everybody went to each other's houses. That was like a tradition. And nobody got to bed until daybreak, really, because we'd go to her grandmother's house, his house, his It was just
For meat pie.
For
for
Canadian
meat,
meat
for,
pie.
for meat
yeah.
pies. Yeah.
We think we're moving on to another aspect of history, aren't we? Do we want to talk about that?
The meat pies.
But we had a community that was so strong that you could not fall through the cracks. They wouldn't let you.
Yeah.
And it was, I mean, we're all still pretty still close together.
Yeah.
And I
We're all
mean, the whole
related.
town was like that. The rich people that came out in the summertime, they were great and they mingled in with us. It just fit. It was a terrific place to go up. I remember being up in this house with my father and shooting the skeet right out the back door there, and we
Sleigh
would be
riding.
running through this house.
Yeah.
It was terrific.
Cheryl, you want to say one last thing?
No, I'm
No.
in good shape. Thank you, though.
Patty? Everybody? What do you think?
Thank you. Oh, Mr.
Yeah?
Weinberg.
Thanks, everybody. There's plenty more to eat and drink in the next room. Thank you to our wonderful panel. I could have listened to you guys all night.
I know.
Thank
They
you.
could have listened to each other all night.
And Dick White has $300 coming to the Montauk Historical Society.